Okay, so we've been having some discussion about job order costing and accumulating the cost of material, labor, and overhead. And one of the questions that typically gives students a tough time is this concept of allocating overhead since it's an indirect cost. Remember, direct cost is charged based off of a bill of material, direct material that is, and direct labor comes directly off a time card, so it's directly traceable. Overhead, on the other hand, you have to come up with a way to allocate overhead. So I want to demonstrate a few things to get the concept of allocation clear in your mind. Let's assume for the moment that I have a 10,000 square foot building, right? 100 feet, 100 feet. And 50% of that building is occupied by the manufacturing organization, and 20% of that organization, of that floor space, is handled by sales, and the other 30% is R&D. And now let's also assume that our monthly rent is $10,000 per month. If we wanted to allocate that $10,000 per month rent to each of the departments based on their square footage, we would be allocating that overhead based on square footage consumed. So in this case, 50% of 10,000 would be $5,000 would be charged to manufacturing. 20% of 10,000 or $2,000 would be charged to sales, and the remaining $3,000 would be charged to R&D. That's the concept of allocation. It's a function of what activity base you are going to use to allocate. In this case, we allocated based on square footage. Let's look at another one. Assume you're planning a luncheon for a club you're in or a university activity, and you're planning to have this lunch meeting where you may be having a guest speaker. And you're estimating that the meal cost is going to be about $5. You believe you're going to have a beverage for each person, and that's going to be about $1. You think you're going to have to rent a room in order to house people, and it's an inexpensive room, $100 for the hour and a half time. And you also have to pay a speaker fee. And that speaker fee is $500. And you estimate that 100 attendees will be present. The question is, what do you charge people in order for you to break even if they all should come? Well, we know that it's going to cost us $5 for that Subway sandwich, and it's going to cost us $1 for that Pepsi Cola, let's just say. So we know we have $6 of cost for sure. The question is, we have these overhead related charges of $100 and $500 or $600. One way to allocate this would be to take that $600 and divide it by the estimated number of people, which means it's another $6. So we would charge $12 for every attendee, and they would be able to listen to the speaker, and we would break even. If more than 100 people come, we're going to make some money, and if less than 100 people come, we're going to lose some money. But the point is, I'm allocating based upon attendees, whereas in this other one, I allocated based on square footage. Now, in the real world, you have to ask yourself a question. I have overhead in my manufacturing facility. Here's the question you need to answer. Why do I have this overhead? What is this overhead supporting? If it's a heavily capitalized manufacturing process with a lot of equipment at all, you might use machine hours. If, however, it's a lot of touch labor, that is individual people putting the product together, you might use direct labor hours or direct labor dollars. So ask yourself that question so that you then take your estimated overhead and you divide it by the appropriate activity base. In my last operations role, now this will be strange for you to perhaps consider this, but let me give you the scenario. 82% of my product was material. 0.5 or 0.5% was direct labor, and the other 18% was overhead. So we concluded that using time cards and tracking all that labor was useless, so we just put that 0.5 of an hour of direct labor and threw it into the overhead pool. and we allocated our overhead based on material cost. It worked for us because really that was the fundamental reason why most of our overhead had existed. So to that end, that's the key question for you to consider. Why does the overhead exist? When you answer that, you'll know how to allocate it. In summary then, assume we have $1 million worth of overhead, and we think that the activity base, the reason why that overhead exists is because of direct labor hours, and we estimate it's going to take 10,000 hours to do everything we're going to do during this period. 10,000 hours into $1 million is $100. So we're going to allocate $100 worth of overhead each time we spend 1 hour making that product. So think of a piece of pie or a pie that has several $100 slices. So each time we use an hour, out comes $100 that will be added to the cost of the product for every direct labor hour. That's allocation. I hope this clears up things for you and allows you to move forward as we move through further chapters utilizing the concept of allocating overhead.